People today have forgotten that among the best survival foods were not in boxes and cans, but in dirt. They grew in backyard gardens, in ditches along fence posts. They were bitter, hard, and sometimes ugly, but they kept whole families alive when store shelves were bare and paychecks were non-existent. It was during the Great Depression from 1929 until the late 1930s that Americans experienced record unemployment, homelessness, and hunger. Bread lines wrapped around blocks. Dust storms devastated cropland, and amidst all that adversity, a quiet determination took root in gardens. People returned to the soil. Seeds were saved, weeds were reconsidered, and a surprising number of vegetables, now all but forgotten, became lifelines. These were not supermarket staples or shine-induced product. These were the tough, forgotten plants our grandparents and great-grandparents depended on to survive. Now, with rising food costs and economic uncertainty once more in the headlines, it's time to take another look at these old survival crops. Here are 25 forgotten vegetables that helped people survive the Great Depression and might be worth planting again. First up, salsify, the oyster plant. This coarse root vegetable earned its nickname because when cooked, it had a flavor reminiscent of that of fresh oysters. Imagine the taste of seafood right in your backyard in difficult times. Families relished salsify as it was so easy to cultivate in impoverished soil and did not object to the cold one bit. Kitchens reeked of the strong smell during the Depression as mothers peeled, boiled, mashed, or fried the roots. A few innovative cooks prepared creamy soups that provided comfort on the chilliest nights. The thing that made salsify so remarkable was the way it kept through the winter in root cellars, making a meal when there was otherwise nothing to eat. High in fiber, calcium, and iron, it gave vigor when individuals required it the most. These days you will not find it at stores except occasionally, although gardeners that realize its value continue to grow it for challenging times. And if we're talking hidden wealth beneath the soil, our next vegetable was so reliable that Depression-era families could practically forget about it and still be nourished. Number 2 is the Jerusalem artichoke, the buried treasure. Despite the name, this vegetable is unrelated to Jerusalem and is not an artichoke at all. Families during the Depression era referred to these knobby underground tubers as their buried treasure, and with good cause. They were so prolific, plant them once and they'd return year after year, sometimes continuing so wild that families could leave a patch alone and come back the next year and have more than enough to dig. Those were lean years, and Jerusalem artichokes were roasted as a potato substitute and lent a sweet, nutty taste to dishes, or ground into flour when wheat was in short supply. What Grandma knew, and nutritionists now agree, is that they're high in insulin, a prebiotic fiber that nourishes friendly gut bacteria. The true miracle of Jerusalem artichokes was their hardiness. When other crops perished in drought or barren soil, these tough natives thrived. Hard to find in supermarkets today. A single crop in your backyard today could be feeding your family years from now, just as they kept families going during the Depression. When meat was scarce and soup pots needed to be filled, our third lost vegetable came to the rescue, or more accurately, the bowl. Rutabaga, the soup stretcher. Half cabbage, half turnip, this homely root vegetable was dubbed the soup stretcher during the Depression. When meat was not an option, which was usually, rutabagas padded soup and stews, making them full enough to silence rumbling tummies. Grandma would perhaps have served them mashed with some precious land and a sprinkle of pepper, turning the bland into a satisfying meal. The value of rutabagas lay in the fact that they had an incredible storage life. People could store them in cold cellars for months, providing them with essential nourishment through prolonged winters. These yellow-fleshed roots were unexpectedly healthy, providing a burst of vitamin C when fresh fruit was just a distant hope. Nowadays, they're all too frequently overlooked in favor of showier vegetables, but those who recall the difficult times recall when you need reliability and sustenance, the faithful rutabaga never fails. If you're having fun on this tour of Depression-era survival foods, take a second to click on that subscribe button. We publish posts like this one weekly that link our heritage to a more sustainable future. The fourth vegetable on our list may be sprouting in your garden today, but you've likely been pulling it out as a weed. Number 4, lamb quarters, the backyard spinach. What gardeners today would pull and discard as a weed, Depression-era families knew as a blessing from nature. Lamb's quarters grew prolifically in disturbed earth, in garden plots, vacant lots, and among rows of intentionally planted vegetables without any care whatsoever. Tender and young, the wild greens have a flavor strikingly similar to spinach, but with even more calcium, protein, and vitamins. In the Depression, people picked the leaves, boiling them in whatever fat they could find, or cooking them Southern style. Kids were dispatched with sacks to harvest this free food that no one had tended or planted. The charm of Lamb's quarters was that it was free. No seeds to purchase, no garden space to occupy. It simply volunteered wherever the ground was bare. To this day, frugal gardeners and foragers realize what our grandparents knew all along. The best nutrition is often that which nature offers for free. Beauty maybe was a luxury in Depression times, but our fifth vegetable teaches us that outer ugliness can conceal riches within. 5. Celeriac, the ugly turnip. During a time when aesthetics were not important and nourishment was, celeriac was a Depression-era garden staple. This ugly root vegetable appears almost extraterrestrial in its rough, deformed outside, but beneath the tough skin is a pale white interior with a delicate celery-like taste. What made celeriac so essential was its versatility. It could be grown in the same spots where regular celery wouldn't grow, required less water, and most importantly, survived the winter months where fresh vegetables existed only in fantasies. It would be shredded raw into salads that brought life to winter meals, diced into soups for taste and texture, or mashed with potatoes to make them go further. Depression-era cooks knew that unsightly equaled underappreciated, and underappreciated equaled cheap. Contemporary cooks could relearn what Grandma had discovered, that beneath the ugly exterior of celeriac lies versatility, nutrition, and staying power not found in newer, more attractive vegetables. When spring hunger was most biting, winter supplies run down, but summer crops still months away. Our sixth vegetable brought the initial welcome splash of color. Number 6, sorrel, the tangy green. When spring hunger was at its worst, winter stores are depleted, but summer's abundance still months away. Sorrel offered the season's first promising sign, an early starting perennial herb. Its sour, lemony leaves were a most welcome supply of vitamin C after long winters of stored food. Families during the Depression relished sorrel for its unique sour zest that brought liveliness to otherwise monotonous fare. A few leaves stirred into potato soup turned it into a delight. Kids were dispatched to pick the wild types that appeared in fields and along fence rows, bringing home sustenance without cost. What made sorrel so worth its weight in gold was that it was perennial, planted in a corner of the garden, and it regrew year after year with no effort. Chefs nowadays shell out big money for what our grandparents knew was free food and medicine, to boot arriving right when the body needed it most. The seventh vegetable on our list resembled something from outer space, but Depression-era gardeners recognized it as a miracle of efficiency. Number 7, kohlrabi, the alien turnip. It's almost otherworldly, with its odd, bulbous stem and leaves sticking out like antennae. Kohlrabi doesn't look quite of this earth. But back in the Depression, families weren't worried about appearances. They were worried about survival. And this odd-looking cabbage relative provided just that. German and Eastern Europe immigrant families particularly enjoyed kohlrabi as it was quick maturing, producing food while other crops were still ripening, and could be prepared in many ways. Children would eat raw slices as a snack, enjoying its crisp apple-like texture. Adults would cook it in soups or stews, shred it in slaws, or boil and butter it as a vegetable side dish. What made kohlrabi so especially valuable was that it was double-purpose. Both bulb and leaves were edible, providing 2 vegetables for the price of 1. When seeds and garden space were measured in inches, this sort of efficiency could be the difference between hunger and a meal. If this walkthrough of your grandparents' victory garden is reminding you of the past or teaching you something new, do me a favor and take a moment to hit that like button and share with someone who appreciates lost knowledge. Our 8th vegetable was a dark-skinned beauty that unexpectedly graced Depression-era tables. Number 8, scorzonera, black salsify. Not as well liked as its relative salsify, scorzonera was the best-kept secret of most Depression-era gardens. This dark-skinned, tapered root vegetable possessed an almost magical property. When cooked correctly, its creamy white interior tasted very much like artichoke hearts or asparagus. During Depression times, when hearty fruits were a luxury, scorzonera added a touch of elegance to plain tables. Resourceful cooks would peel the roots, soaking them in lemon water, at the same time to keep them from discoloring, boil them gently, and serve them with whatever fat they could muster. A dab of bacon fat for the fortunate, a skim of lard for the rest. What was so valuable about scorzonera was that it did well in poor soil. When other crops were failing due to drought or depleted garden soil, this hardy root went deep, excavating subsoil nutrients out of reach for other vegetables. It's mostly forgotten today, but anyone concerned about genuine food security would do well to recall what our grandparents understood. Sometimes the deepest roots shine brightest. The ninth vegetable on our list did more than feed families. It kept up the small comforts of a morning habit when even coffee was a luxury. Number 9. Chicory, the coffee stretch. When even such modest indulgences as coffee become prohibitively costly, chicory stepped in to fill the gap, particularly in the South. The common roadside weed with pale blue flowers became a mainstay in homes, not only as a vegetable, but as a way of stretching limited coffee supplies or replacing them altogether. Families would dig up the roots, wash them thoroughly, chop them up finely, and roast them slowly in ovens until they were dark brown and had a deep, bitter flavor. Ground and brewed like coffee, the root of the chicory plant created a dark aromatic drink that, while not identical to coffee, offered warmth and ritual when both were in short supply. The leaves did not go to waste either. Young chicory greens were harvested and consumed like lettuce or wilted into recipes for a bitter, nutritious boost. This do-everything plant best embodies the Depression-era mentality. Nothing wasted, everything used, and small joys maintained however possible. The 10th vegetable on our list will astonish you. It's probably sprouting in the cracks of your sidewalk as you read this, and restaurants are serving it up for top dollar. Number 10. Purslane, the omega weed. Few plants embody Depression-era thrift more than purslane. Whereas gardeners today wrestle with the low-spreading succulent as a weed, grandparents simply picked it as a superfood, germinating with tiny paddle-like leaves and reddish stems wherever the soil had been disturbed. Purslane provided sustenance without planting a single seed. What distinguishes purslane, although science would not verify it for decades to come, it is very high in nutritional content. It has more omega-3 fatty acids than any other green leafy vegetable, along with being high in vitamins A and C, magnesium, and calcium. Depression families would throw the faintly bitter, faintly salty leaves into salads, stir them into beans for nutrition, or fry them with onions and a bit of fat. Children learned to recognize and harvest this free food that appeared in garden pathways, between rows, and even in cracks in the sidewalk. These days, what our grandparents picked for free appears on gourmet restaurant menus and at upscale prices at farmers markets. In Depression-era rural America, our 11th vegetable often even outranks potatoes in popularity. Not for taste, but for sheer economy. Number 11. Turnips, the budget root. In some of the country's depressed regions during the Depression, turnips expectedly outdid potatoes in popularity. Not for flavor, but for their great economy. These rapid maturing roots could be planted in early spring to be picked through the winter, and then once more in late summer to save through the fall, essentially doubling the use of garden space. Families during the Great Depression cherished turnips as two-for-the-money vegetables. The hot roots and nutrient-rich greens were both edible. Nothing went to waste. The roots were boiled, mashed, roasted, or chopped in soups. And the greens were cooked down with a bit of salt pork chunk for seasoning. It was what gave turnips such value that they could be stored. Properly stored in cold cellars or even buried underground in raw-lined pits, turnips would last until winter, providing much-needed nourishment when fresh foods were impossible. To turnip winter became a common phrase meaning to preserve in hard times, something our grandmothers knew all too well. If these forgotten vegetables are making you think outside the box about your own garden, subscribe now. We'll be sharing guides on how to grow these Depression-era staples in future videos. When dull meals needed a pick-me-up, the 12th vegetable on our list brought heat to Depression-era plates without costing a penny. Number 12, mustard greens, the heat greens. When times were lean but spirits had to be lifted, Depression chefs turned to mustard greens. They were spicy, peppery greens that emerged quickly, survived poorly, and lent much-needed bite to otherwise mundane diets. Their signature zing brought bite to plates on which meat and spice were an extravagance. Households would harvest the young, fresh leaves for salad and gather more mature leaves for boiling. The general preparation in most households, particularly in the South, was slow simmering with a mere shred of smoked meat or bacon, sometimes only the rind, to create pot liquor, the rich cooking broth that was absorbed with cornbread so nothing was lost. What made mustard greens so precious during the Depression was their cold hardiness and quick growth. While other garden vegetables floundered, mustard would continue to produce, sometimes into winter in warm weather. Seeds weren't wasted either replanted or ground to make prepared mustard, a flavor booster for plain fare. Our 13th vegetable has a magical quality that few vegetables have. It actually gets sweeter after frost blesses its roots. Number 13, parsnips, the sweet root. Before refrigerated trucks brought year-round produce to stores, winter produce needed special qualities. Parsnips possessed the most magical quality of all. They actually became sweeter after frost blessed their roots. While other vegetables grew weaker with cold weather, parsnips transformed, converting their starches to sugar when temperatures dropped. Depression families sowed parsnips in spring, but left them in the ground until after autumn's initial hard frosts, when they sweetened almost beyond recognition. These pale cream-colored roots, which looked like pale carrots, were then pulled as needed during winter, a sweet treat when sugar was rationed or unavailable. Grandmothers would mash them up with a little butter if they could, roast them to caramelize their sweetness, or add them to soups and stews. Parsnips offered more calories per serving than the majority of vegetables from the garden. Calories were important when they did matter. They stored extremely well, either in the ground, where the ground wouldn't freeze solid, or buried in sand in the root cellar. In gardens where beauty was a luxury beyond their means, our 14th vegetable stood like stained glass, bringing color to even the darkest of days. Number 14, Swiss chard, the colorful savor. In gardens where aesthetics had become an unaffordable indulgence, Swiss chard was a burst of color like stained glass. Its ruby red, golden yellow, or white stems and deep green leaves provided visual respite from the typical dull Depression-era plate. But its worth extended much further than looks. It was what rendered chard pieces in lean times. Its incredible yield and resilience. Chard did not bolt so easily in warm weather like spinach. It produced continuously throughout summer. It tolerated light frosts and kept producing right into fall, unlike more fragile greens. It was best of all because it could be cut again and again, the outer leaves removed while leaving the inside to resprout, producing successive crops from a single planting. Depression-era home cooks prepared chard much like spinach, wilting the leaves and stems into whatever seasoning happened to be on hand. Chopped and cooked slightly longer, the stems added heft to soups. Nothing went to waste. Even tougher, older leaves could be finely chopped and mixed into casseroles or bean soups for nutrition and beauty. When spices were too costly luxuries, our vegetable number 15 provided flavor as well as medicine from the backyard. Number 15, horseradish, the fire root. When spices were beyond reach as luxuries during the Depression, horseradish provided backyard intensity of taste. This tenacious perennial root had to be planted only once. Afterward, the dilemma was generally not growing it, but keeping it from getting out of hand. Depression-era parents prized horseradish as a condiment, but also as medicine. Horseradish cleared sinuses when one was sick with colds, and it was said boosted the immune system, something crucial since doctor visits weren't an affordable option. Grating the root fresh, moms would mix a little vinegar and salt into the mixture and seal it in a jar to store so that the potency would stay. A little went a long way. Only a small spoonful would transform bland boiled potatoes or dull beans into something to remember. Added pizzazz to meat when meat was rare. And when meat was out of the question, transformed bland vegetable dishes into something more enjoyable. Horseradish added heat without expense, year after year, from the same spot in the garden. If these tales of our grandparents' resourcefulness and resilience are speaking to you, please do take a moment to share this video with someone who values old school wisdom. And don't forget to subscribe for more lost knowledge from the good old days. When meat grew scarce, our 16th vegetable came to the rescue to offer essential protein across the southern states. Number 16, cowpeas, the southern protein. Also referred to as black-eyed peas, Crowder peas, or field peas depending on the type, cowpeas proved to be a lifesaver in the South during the Depression era. When meat was rare and only seen occasionally on plates, these humble legumes answered the call to provide much-needed protein and sustenance. What made cowpeas so valuable was that they were nitrogen-fixing, truly enriching the soil in which they were planted, making them perfect for dry Depression-era gardens. They thrived in hot, humid environments where other plants would not and required little water once established. Families would hull the fresh peas in summer for on-the-spot consumption, normally stewed with some little onion and perhaps a small amount of salt pork if they had it. The dried peas lasted forever and were winter staples, rehydrated and cooked slowly. Nothing was wasted. Even the empty pods were given to animals, and the young leaves could be used as greens in cases of extreme necessity. The New Year's good luck custom of consuming black-eyed peas existed before the Depression, but it definitely took on new meaning during those years. For many families, having these reliable proteins made the difference between an empty stomach and a full one. The 17th item on our list performed magic in the kitchen, turning soups into satisfying meals when meat was just a memory. Number 17, okra, the gumbo staple. When meat was short and meals had to be stretched, Depression-era Southern cooks used okra. Okra, a tropical vegetable native to Africa, flourished in the hot summers that dried up other produce and provided several culinary advantages beyond plain sustenance. Okra's best virtue was its ability to thicken naturally. Chopped and added to soups or stews, it yielded a substance that gave body and fullness to dishes that might otherwise have been liquid and unfulfilling. A handful or two of okra pods had the power to transform a pot of vegetables and water into something like a meal. Depression families savored okra fresh in summer, thrown in a cornmeal batter and fried. And preserved it over winter by drying, pickling, or canning. The seeds even were roasted and ground as a coffee substitute when actual coffee became a luxury beyond reach. From gumbos to simple okra and tomatoes, the vegetable represented resilience during hard times, thriving when times were most difficult. Our 18th vegetable was not one families planted. It was one they discovered, a secret for centuries to most, but one the Native Americans knew. Number 18, groundnuts, the hidden bean. Bafflingly, they're not peanuts, though groundnuts, Apios americana, are indigenous North American tubers that adhere to vines, often close to water. Farm families discovered during the Depression what had long been known to Native Americans. These below-ground protein treasures would sustain life through the leanest times. Groundnuts were nature's gift to the forager, growing wild throughout much of the country, particularly in the streams and forests of the eastern regions. They required no tilling. The string-habited tuberous roots could be pulled without destroying the plant, making it possible to gather throughout the year sustainably. What made groundnuts more precious was their better nutritional value. They contained 3 times the protein of potatoes and loads of carbohydrates. Families during the Depression prepared them in much the same manner as potatoes, boiled, mashed, or added to stews. The flavor, described often as being halfway between potato and bean, added variety to limited diets. While nearly forgotten in memory today, groundnuts are a testament to the resourcefulness that characterized Depression's survival, looking beyond the garden to what nature offered freely. Perhaps no plant better symbolized the shift in American thinking between then and now than our 19th vegetable. What we poison today, our grandparents treasured. Number 19, dandelion greens, the free salad. Maybe no flower symbolizes more the shift of American attitude from the Great Depression to the current era than the dandelion. What suburban residents poison today as a pest on their grass, our grandparents utilized asopin, no-expense victuals when winter stores were low. In early spring, when vitamins were low and fresh greens several months from maturation, dandelion greens were an essential source of nutrients. They were harvested by families of the youngest, most delicate leaves before the plants bloomed, when bitterness was slight. They were used in salads, eaten immediately, usually with hot dressing from cooked bacon to wilt the leaves and blunt their subtle bitterness, or boiled as for spinach and seasoned with what was on hand. Nothing went to waste. The flowers were harvested for use in dandelion wine or fritters, and the roots were sometimes roasted and ground as a coffee substitute. Rich in vitamins A and C, iron, and calcium, dandelions provided free medicine as well as sustenance. Parents in the Depression years passed along when and how to harvest these plants, information largely forgotten in only 2 generations. If you're getting something out of these lost food traditions, be sure you subscribe to our channel. We'll be diving deeper into Depression-era wisdom in future videos. Our 20th vegetable was nothing more than a pesky weed with sticky burrs, but Depression-era families knew it as potent food medicine. Number 20, burdock root, the earthy energy. What others now only see as stubborn weed with gluey burrs was at one time a staple food remedy of the Depression era. Burdock, its 3 foot plus or more deep-lying taproot, drawing out minerals and nutrients from depths to which other vegetables were not able. American Japanese had traditionally cherished this vegetable, which they named gobo when they cooked it, and during the Depression it gained widespread popularity as families admitted onto their tables any plant that was edible. The roots of first-year plants that were harvested in fall were scrapped rather than peeled. Most of the flavor is just beneath the skin, thinly sliced and stir-fried, added to soups or pickled to preserve. What made burdock so desirable was that it could grow in poor, packed soils where other vegetables won't. It also stored very well through the winter if placed in cool, slightly damp conditions. Burdock roots are full of inulin, the identical prebiotic fiber as that of Jerusalem artichokes, so it was satiating and healthy for the digestive tract, beneficial when diets were limited and healthcare out of reach. The 21st vegetable was an old crop that made a comeback when times were bad, providing both nutritious greens and protein-rich seeds from the same plant. 21. Amaranth, the ancient grain. Amaranth had nearly disappeared from American gardens prior to the Depression, but this ancient grain, which had been a staple of Native American diets, came back into favor when times got tough. Its double value, providing both healthy leaves and protein-rich seeds from the same plant, made it very valuable in terms of maximizing garden returns. Depression-era families harvested the new leaves and boiled them like spinach when the crop was in growing season. As the plants matured, sending forth radiant colors, rich reds, golds, and purples, beauty to gardens at a time when little else could be bought. Later, the enormous seed heads, packed with thousands of small seeds, were cut and threshed. The seeds could be ground into flour, cooked as a hot cereal such as cream of wheat, or popped like miniature popcorn. Gluten-free and high in protein, amaranth seeds filled out the nutritional gap when meat and wheat were a luxury. Science has since confirmed what Depression gardeners discovered out of necessity. Amaranth is one of the most complete protein foods in the vegetable world. When yard room was in short supply, our 22nd vegetable taught Depression-era families how to grow up instead of out. Number 22, Malabar spinach, the climber. Not a spinach, technically, but a productive vine with spinachy leaves. Malabar spinach gave Depression-era gardeners a clever solution to tight space. When every inch of available ground had to produce as much food as possible, growing vertically became a necessity. And this warm season climber gave up food while occupying little ground space. In contrast to true spinach, which bolts and becomes bitter during warm summer temperatures, Malabar spinach thrives in hot weather, providing fresh greens during the peak summer months. Home gardeners grew it up strings, fences, or trellises, harvesting the tender stem tips and leaves through summer and into fall until frost finally ended production. The tender leaves, whose subtle taste and soft, slightly mucilaginous texture resembling okra, were used to add a natural thickening to soups, to be stir-fried with other available vegetables, or eaten fresh in salads. Nutritious with vitamin A and C, iron and calcium, Malabar spinach filled the summer green gap when all other leafy greens had withered away or gone to seed. Our 23rd vegetable taught Depression-era families that sometimes the most reliable foods were the ones that could sit patiently underground until they were called for. 23. Winter radish, the keeper. Unlike the small, quick-growing spring radishes most modern gardeners are familiar with, winter radishes were an entirely different category. Large, keepable roots that supported families through cold months. Varieties like Black Spanish, Daikon, and China Rose were planted in late summer, allowing to ripen through the fall, and then preserved for wintertime eating. Depression-era households valued their radishes for their fine-keeping qualities. Stored properly in cold, humid places, they were still crisp and edible for months. Some varieties lasted until spring greens were in transit. They were more pungent tasting than spring radishes, but that intensity was a prized asset during winter when fresh flavor was scarce. These big roots were grated into winter slaws, added to soups and stews, or picked to be stored. Some varieties were cultivated as large as turnips, providing much food from a small area of garden soil and requiring very little attention after planting. They've nearly completely disappeared from American gardens today, but in parts of Europe and Asia, these storage radishes remain popular winter vegetables. If these overlooked vegetables are making you consider food security in a different way, take a moment to like this video and maybe share it with friends who value self-sufficiency. When summer temperatures caused conventional greens to bolt and become bitter, our 24th vegetable was just getting into its stride. Number 24, New Zealand spinach, the summer green. When actual spinach fell victim to summer heat, depression gardeners employed the spinach alternative from the other side of the world. New Zealand spinach, which is not botanically related to actual spinach, offered the same nutritional benefits but thrived in the hottest summer months, when most greens became bitter or bolted to seed. This plant was valued by families for its yield. The stems could be removed repeatedly, with new growth coming in rapidly to replace that removed. A single spring planting would provide greens constantly up to frost, sometimes offering produce for 6 months or more during more temperate conditions. The fleshy triangular leaves were cooked much like spinach, wilted in a small fat if available, added to soups or mixed with other vegetables. Rich in vitamin C, New Zealand spinach kept vitamin deficiency at bay that was common in the Depression times, particularly when fresh fruit was unaffordable. The seed was easy to preserve and it gave next year's yield without additional cost. Our 25th and final vegetable might surprise you most of all. It's one that most people these days actually avoid in fear of its sting, but that our grandparents understood its true value. Number 25, nettles, the sting that feeds. Perhaps the most formidable entry on our list, stinging nettles represent the ultimate Depression-era thriftiness. Sometimes what looks scary can be your best pal. Wildflowers that give a nasty shock when touched with bare skin, these were picked rather than avoided during economic downturns. Great Depression-era foragers were instructed to glove up when they picked the spring shoots, pulling them up at a mere 6 to 8 inches high. Blanched in boiling water, the hair's bite was taken out and the plants were not only harmless but quite nutrient-rich. Cup for cup, nettles contain more calcium than milk, more iron than spinach, and generous amounts of vitamins A, C, and K. Families prepared nettles in much the same way as spinach, added to soups, cooked down with available fat, or mixed with other greens. The nutrient-rich leftover cooking water was never discarded, but was the basis for soups or a tonic to improve strength. Even some families dried nettles for winter use, storing their great nutrition for the span of time that fresh greens were not present. Our grandparents understood something valuable, that sometimes what seems aggressive is really offering help. If we approach with respect and understanding, our grandparents didn't merely know how to do more with less. They knew how to live. These 25 vegetables weren't additions, they were lifelines. Grown in depleted soil, harvested from back alleys, or foraged on foot, each is a testament to perseverance and resourcefulness. And maybe, just maybe, we'd be wise to remember them. Because in uncertain times, the lessons of the past aren't just history, they're a guide, a seed, a reminder that even in the worst of days, something can grow. So plant a row, try something new, or rather, something old. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these forgotten food traditions, thumbs up this video, share it with someone who enjoys self-sufficiency, and subscribe to our channel for more wisdom from the garden of the past. Tell us in the comments section below which one of these veggies you've grown or would like to try. Until next time, remember that the wisdom of our grandparents never goes out of style. It just waits quietly until we need it most.